Fiona Wood, welcome to Booktopia.
Thank you, Caroline.
Your first book was 6 Impossible Things. What made you decide that you wanted to keep one of the characters from that book for your next book?
That was a complete surprise and nothing that I had planned in advance. And it came about because the character Sibylla, who's one of the 2 main characters in Wildlife, I had constructed a story for her which included a really toxic friendship with a character called Holly. And as I was developing that storyline, I kept thinking, gosh, poor Sibylla, she really needs a friend like Lou, who is, her story had happily ended in the other book, in 6 Impossible Things. So when I decided that she would benefit from crossing paths with Lou, I had to construct a storyline for Lou, which involved her having a reason to change schools and to be appearing at Sibylla's school. And the reason was that her boyfriend, her beloved Fred, died. In the narrative space between the 2 books, he dies in a cycling accident. And when I realised that that would be a really strong motivator for her to move schools, it nearly broke my heart. I couldn't believe that it had come into my mind and I had to kill this lovely character. And as a result of that, when I was writing the Lou storyline for Wildlife, I spent a lot of time howling with my head on my desk, just crying and crying. And still there are passages in Wildlife I can't read out now because they make me cry. And you know how many times a writer reads a manuscript. Usually you become inured to that sort of thing, but it still breaks my heart.
I can understand that, because there are some moments in the book that are really very, very poignant and tender. So what is Wildlife about?
Well, I suppose primarily it investigates that area of identity and self-discovery, and it does it via a few areas such as friendship and such as first love, first sex, and betrayal within friendship too. So it's a coming-of-age story looking at those particular areas. And
it's particularly good, I think, on the whole business of popularity and the trying on of new social dynamics, isn't it?
Well, I think that idea of sort of beauty, popularity and self-image and social hierarchies within school and how those things all sort of interrelate are so interesting. And teenaged people are so vulnerable to those sort of vicissitudes and changes in popularity. And I'm really interested in the idea of the pressure on girls, particularly to look a certain way, to be a certain way, and so those areas were all very interesting for me.
There's so much bravura in all of that, isn't there? There's so much posturing and pretending to be more confident and pretending to be more sexual, for example. And there's so much kind of quivering uncertainty behind that. Why do you think that female friendships are so complex?
Look, that's a great question, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do know that that's the most common feedback I've had, particularly from adult readers of the book, and that is to say, I had a Holly. I had a Holly. And I think sometimes it's probably to do with self-esteem that we sometimes settle for a bad friendship. I know I've certainly been in the situation of trying to please someone who really didn't justify that attention from me, and I think a lot of people have had those toxic friendships. And I'm not sure why it does seem to be more typical of friendships between girls. I really don't know, but I think it is.
Tell us a little bit more about Lou, because she's a fantastic character and she's got great strength, despite the fact that she's very much grieving for Fred.
I like Lou. She's got a very dry sense of humour, and she's very clear-eyed, and she's a girl who's grown up with 2 mothers, so she's someone who knows how to sort of stand her ground. She's not very affected by peer pressure, and she made, for those reasons and for the fact that she's in this sort of self-imposed isolation because of Fred's grieving, she made a perfect outside observer to what was going on with Sibylla and her friendship with Holly and her interaction with the rest of the year level. So yes, look, Lou is someone I could easily spend another book with, but she is a minor character in Cloud Wish, which is the 3rd book, and I've just finished that.
Is that right? You've downgraded her.
minor, major, minor again.
Because one of the things that I like about her is she's very smart and knowing, and she can run rings around adults. So she's in therapy because of the loss of Fred, and she's kind of got the measure of her therapist, hasn't she?
She was, I have to say, that was one of the scenes between Lou. She's gone from seeing a psychiatrist and then moving to this outdoor education campus. She's now in the hands of a psychologist, the school counsellor, and it was great fun writing her interaction with the counsellor, because she knows exactly what she's expected to deliver and what sort of progress she might be expected to be making. But she's actually driving her own car there. She knows exactly what's going on, and she also knows that she can't push the grieving process too hard. It's something that's happening very gradually for her, that she's learning to live without Fred. So yes, that was fun. And that's actually one of the, people often ask me about the difference between writing TV and writing a novel, and to have access to someone's innermost thoughts on the page is terrific fun. I really enjoy that.
I guess you can do that in some television, can't you, where you've got the sort of the inner voice that might appear in, say, something like Offspring, where you find out what a character is thinking, as well as seeing them manoeuvring their way through life.
True, and you do have to use voiceover for that, though, which is something that we, you often, it's often frowned upon, although I think Offspring uses that beautifully.
One of the other things that I really like about Wildlife, apart from the fact that that the title obviously suggests it, is the setting in the bush and the relationship between the kids and the bush as a testing ground, as a place of endurance. So, what gave you that idea for the camp setting, the bush camp setting?
Yes, that was that really started off simply being a place to get them away from parents, away from mobile phones and texting, away from Angry Birds, Facebook and Skyping. But it soon became very resonant for me because of the sort of associations with the romantic movement and untrammeled wilderness and death and the things that those characters were going through. So it just seemed, as well as providing a pressure cooker setting away from all support structures and parents, as well as all the distractions, it was a lovely background for Lou going through her grieving. And so I was able to use, for instance, the Christina Rossetti poem in the text about death. And so the setting worked well for me, and it grew and grew in its usefulness and resonance as I kept writing. And the original inspiration for that setting is that my husband went to an outdoor education campus school like that, and we used to love hearing the stories of how kids would go crazy and run off into the bush, and so it was always in my mind as a wonderful setting for a group of teenage characters.
Is there any one particular thing about the way these teenagers behave that you, as a parent, as well as a writer, kind of view with a particular sort of alarm in terms of all that peer pressure, all that competition, and all the different sorts of tensions that are coming to bear on this sort of extraordinary collection of hormones?
Well, I think I was lucky in a way to have had my children going through their teenage years in the time just before I started writing the novels, because I was reminded of what a tough time it is and how extreme the pressures are. I tried not to bring my parent self to the writing process, I have to say, although there were things that I couldn't resist saying, for instance, about sex, and you really don't want to be didactic when it comes to young adult fiction, because readers will just throw your book against the wall. But I couldn't write about sex without putting some of my thoughts in. And so I made Sibylla's mother a sex educator, which gave me, structurally it gave me a way of listing a few things that Sibylla remembered her mother would say. She's remembering it with an eye roll, but it allowed me to put things into the text, such as no means no, drunk means no, a whole list of things. They are literally listed, about 15 or 20 things about what I think about safe sex and emotionally responsible sex and stuff like that. And that was important for me to put it in there, and I think I've managed to put it in a motivated way. And part of the reason I wanted to do it is because I think fiction is such a great place for teenagers to read about sex, because I know as a parent, whenever I raised the subject of sex with my own children, the most typical response was, "Can you please stop talking now?" And I don't think that's uncommon. So there's a whole lot of stuff about sex that they benefit from knowing, but teachers and parents aren't often, they're usually not the most popular communicators of those ideas.
Absolutely. So what does happen in the next book, and who's there and who's not?
Well, Sib and Lou and Michael are there. There's a very minor character mentioned in Wildlife, Van Wok Phan, and she's really just a maths nerd. She's a Vietnamese Australian character and a friend of Michael's, and she's the central character in Cloud Wish, and Cloud Wish is the translation of her name, Van Wok. And again, talking about being didactic, I've just finished the first draft, and in part I'm using her as a central character in response to my incredible anger about the Australian government's attitude towards asylum seekers. And so at the end of the first draft, I've got a whole lot of slabs of me ranting, which I have to pull.
That's going to have to go.
So yes, and it's a romance. I think teenage readers often respond to a romantic storyline, but it's also about the character of Van Wok coming to understand her mother and the complexity of that relationship between that generation. Her mother arrived by boat, and the expectations that those parents put upon their children. So that's exploring a lot of those areas as well as the romance. And I've put her with a very unlikely character who is also in Wildlife, who's a complete jock called Billy Gardner. So it's been good fun to write.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Fiona Wood.
Thanks, Caroline.